The river doesn't forgive. That's the first thing you learn when you grow up along the Powder River country of Wyoming. It gives you water, and it takes what it wants in return. A calf, a season, sometimes a man. It has no patience for pride or sentiment. When the wind comes off the Bighorn Mountains in the dead of October, it strips everything down to what's real. And what's real, most of the time, is harder than anyone wants to admit. Caleb Marsh had been real for 43 years. Real and quiet, and finished with the kind of wanting that makes a man foolish. He ran 200 head on a dry grass spread outside Sheridan, fixed his own fences, cooked his own meals, and slept on one side of a bed that used to have another side to it. 6 years since Ruth passed. 6 years since the house went from a home to a place where a man kept his boots. He hadn't planned it that way. Nobody does. He was mending a split rail along the east pasture when he heard the wagon, not the sound of a neighbor. He knew every rig in 30 miles by its creak and rattle. This one was unfamiliar, light, moving slow like the driver wasn't sure of the road. He didn't look up right away. He finished the nail he was setting. Then he looked. The wagon was a rented buckboard, mud caked along the wheels, and the woman driving it was young, mid-20s, maybe, with dark hair pinned back under a plain traveling hat, and the kind of posture that comes from knowing people are always watching and deciding they don't care. She pulled the horse to a stop at his fence line and looked at him from across the top rail with steady gray eyes. "Are you Caleb Marsh?" she said. "Depends on who's asking," he said, which was habit, not cleverness. "My name is Serena Cold," she said. "My mother sent me." She held out an envelope. He didn't take it right away. He set down his hammer. He walked to the fence and stood on his side of it, looking at her the way a man looks at something he doesn't have a category for yet. The envelope was sealed with wax that had cracked somewhere along the road. The handwriting on the front said his name in a hand he didn't recognize. "Who's your mother?" he said. The young woman's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the particular effort of someone who has practiced saying a hard thing and is now actually saying it. "Her name was Adeline Cold," she said. "She died 11 days ago. She asked me before she went to bring you this." Caleb looked at the envelope. He looked at the woman. He took the envelope. He didn't open it at the fence. He wasn't built that way. He walked back toward the house and, after a moment's pause, said without turning around, "There's water on the stove. Tie the horse to the post." She did. He read the letter at the kitchen table. Serena stood near the door in the same posture she'd held at the fence, not quite in and not quite out, giving him room to be a person without an audience. He noticed that. He didn't say anything about it. Adeline Cold. He had to sit with the name for a moment before it opened up. 20 years ago, maybe more. A winter he'd spent working survey lines for the railroad out of Casper, a boarding house on the edge of town where $3 a week got you a room, 2 meals, and no questions. The woman who ran it had been precise and unsentimental and fair in the way that people are when they've had to become fair on their own without anyone modeling it for them. He'd stayed 4 months. They'd shared meals at a long table with 6 other boarders, talked sometimes in the evenings about nothing that mattered, and when the survey work moved north, he'd moved with it. He hadn't thought about her in years. You don't, usually. The people who treat you decently in passing tend to blur into the general good of a life. You don't realize you remember them until something shakes them loose. He read the letter twice. "Caleb, I hope this reaches you. I've been trying to find you for about 2 months, which tells you something about how my health has been. Serena will explain the rest if you let her. I'm writing because my daughter has no one left. Her father was a man I chose poorly and don't regret for long. The family I had is gone or gone away. Serena is 27 years old and she is smarter than the world has given her credit for, and she has a stubbornness that will either be her ruin or her salvation depending on the weather. I am not asking you to take her in like a charity case. She would not stand for that, and neither would I. I'm asking because I remember that you were an honest man, and honest men are rarer than any of us admit. I'm asking because she needs a season somewhere safe to work out what comes next. She can cook and keep accounts, and she learns fast. Beyond that, she'll prove herself. You don't owe me anything. But I'd like to think that somewhere in all those evenings around that table in Casper, I did something that was worth calling in. Give her a chance, Caleb. That's all I'm asking. Just a chance. He folded the letter along its original creases. Serena was still at the door. She didn't tell me what she wrote, Serena said. I want you to know that. Whatever she asked, it was her asking, not me. Caleb set the letter on the table. He looked at his hands for a moment, which was something he did when he needed a second to be honest with himself. She asked me to give you a season, he said. I figured. Did you know she was going to do this? Serena looked at the floor, then back at him. She told me she was writing to someone she trusted. She didn't tell me who until the second to last day. By then, arguing about it seemed unkind. He almost said something. He stopped himself. She was right that you'd probably say no, Serena added. She put that in there? She told me directly. She said, he's a good man and a private one, and he'll want to send you back, and if he tries, you tell him I said he was the only person in Casper who ever returned the $2 he borrowed and didn't make a production of it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. That's a strange thing to remember, he said. She remembered everything. The wind moved under the eaves. Outside, the horse Serena had rented shifted its weight and snorted. He stood up. There's a room off the back, he said. It's not much. Stove works. Window sticks. Supper's at 6. He walked to the door, stepped past her, and went back out to his fence. He left her standing in the kitchen with the letter still on the table and a pot of water that had long since gone lukewarm on the stove. She stayed. The first week was an exercise in careful distance. Caleb was not rude, and he was not warm. He was efficient, which was as much as he could manage. He pointed her toward tasks, and she completed them without requiring supervision or explanation twice. She kept accounts, as her mother had promised, went through 3 years of his ledgers in a single evening, and produced a handwritten summary by morning that identified 2 consistent errors in his supply calculations that had been costing him money every quarter without his realizing. He read the summary twice. He said nothing. He changed the calculations. She cooked in the evenings. Not fancy, not apologetic, just food that was good because she'd been making it her whole life and had the unconscious confidence of someone who's learned something without thinking of it as skill. He ate it without comment, which was the highest praise he knew how to give. They didn't talk much. He asked about what needed doing. She told him. She asked about the land. He told her. The shape of the days was practical and clear, and they moved through them like 2 people who have agreed, without saying so, to set aside the more complicated conversation until there is less else to do. Then the second week, on a cold Tuesday, Caleb was up on the barn roof resetting shingles that the October wind had pulled loose. He'd done this alone every year. He moved too fast on the ladder, a moment of carelessness that he'd been getting away with for 6 years because there was no one around to see it, and the rung gave way at the wrong angle, and he came down fast. He caught the gutter on the way, enough to slow it, not enough to stop it. He hit the frozen ground on his left side and lay there while the world decided what it wanted to do next. Serena appeared above him. Not running. She'd learned quickly that alarm made him close up, just there, crouching, looking at him with clear eyes. Where does it hurt? She asked. Everywhere in general, he said. Nothing specific. Can you make a fist? He could. Can you flex your ankle? He could, though it wasn't pleasant. Then you're bruised, not broken. She stayed crouched. You were rushing. I know the roof. You knew the ladder too, she said without heat. Knowing and being careful aren't the same thing. He started to push himself up. She offered her hand. He didn't take it. She didn't remove it. She just waited, and after a moment, because his ribs were making a persuasive argument and pride is expensive, he took it. She said nothing further about it. That evening at supper, she put a tin of liniment on the table without comment, and they ate in the same silence they always ate in. except that the silence had shifted in some way that was hard to name. Thicker, maybe, or more honest. That night, he didn't sleep well. Not because of the ribs, though those didn't help. He lay in the dark and thought about the fact that for the first time in 6 years, someone had been in the yard to see him fall. The smallness of it embarrassed him. He'd built his whole life around not needing that, and here was something small and accidental and true. It mattered that she had been there. He didn't know what to do with that, so he set it aside, the way you set something down when you're not sure of the ground beneath you. It was the books that changed things, not the account ledgers, a different kind. He'd been looking for the deed to the north pasture, which he'd been meaning to refile with the county for 2 years, and he'd gone through the back room looking for it. He found the deed. He also found, on the small shelf above the cot where Serena slept, a row of books with cracked spines, 4 or 5 of them, the kind that come from years of rereading, not collection. He hadn't asked about them, but one morning when the weather kept them both inside, she was sitting at the kitchen table with one of them open, making small penciled notes in the margins, and he caught himself looking at the page from across the room. "What are you writing?" he asked. She looked up, not surprised. She'd learned to track where he was in a room without making it obvious. "Arguments," she said. "Against what?" She turned to the book so he could see the cover. It was a legal text, something to do with land claims and property rights in the territories. It wasn't new. She'd been through it more than once. "There's a case my mother spent 4 years trying to resolve," Serena said. "She leased property in Natrona County that a man named Aldous Bain has been claiming as his own since she got sick. He knows she's gone now." She paused. "He knows I'm the only one left to contest it." Caleb sat down across from her. It wasn't a decision exactly, more like gravity. "Your mother owned property?" "A small lot with a structure. It was hers, clear and legal. She has documentation." Serena's jaw set in the way it did when she was keeping something steady by force of will. "Vane's been filing counterclaims. His position is that a woman who let the lot sit unused during illness effectively abandoned it, and that her heir, that's me, has no standing to reclaim it without a male co-filer." Caleb was quiet. "That's not how the law reads," he said finally. "I know that. Vane knows that too." She looked at him. "But he's banking on me not being able to afford the filing fees and the attorney time to prove it, and he's right that I can't. Not yet. Here's the thing about that conversation that I want you to sit with for a moment." She wasn't asking him for anything. She told him the situation the way she told him about fence lines and supply costs, as a fact that needed to be understood, not as a plea. That restraint in a woman who had every reason to be desperate said more about who she was than anything else she'd done in 2 weeks. Caleb looked at the legal text. He looked at the margin notes, which were precise and organized, and showed a mind that had been working this problem for a long time. "Your mother didn't put this in the letter," he said. "No." She met his eyes. "She thought it would make you feel like she was using you. She said she'd rather ask for a season of honest work and let the rest come out in its own time." A pause. "She was trying to protect your dignity as much as mine." He didn't answer right away. He went to the window and looked out at the north pasture, which was gray and still in the November light, and he thought about a woman in a boarding house in Casper who remembered a $2 debt for 20 years. "I'll look at the filing," he said. "I know the county recorder." Serena said, "You don't have to." "I know," he said. He turned back from the window. "I'm going to anyway." They rode into Sheridan together on a Friday, which Caleb had been quietly dreading. Sheridan was not a large town, and it had long opinions about everything it observed. He felt the weight of those opinions as they tied the horses outside the county offices. The careful looks, the measuring stillness of a town deciding what story it was going to tell about what it saw. A man outside the land office, wide, unhurried, with the particular patience of someone who has paid for information, watched them walk inside. Caleb noticed him, filed it away. Inside, the clerk was professionally neutral. The filing was straightforward. Caleb had been right about the law, and the counterclaim Vane had filed turned out to be thinner than it had probably looked without anyone to challenge it. By the time they came back out, the clerk had given them a receipt and a date for the formal hearing. The man outside was gone. On the road home, Serena was quiet for a while. Then she said, "People were looking at us." "Yes," Caleb said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. The way he was learning she appreciated. "Less than I expected," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He kept his eyes on the road. But he felt the look, and something in his chest did something it hadn't done in a long time. Shifted, slightly, like a door that wasn't locked but had been closed so long it required intention to move. She didn't ask him what he meant. She turned back to the road. That was enough. For now, that was enough. December came hard and early, the way it does in the Bighorn foothills. The work changed shape. Less outdoor repair, more tending, hauling, preserving what could be preserved. They fell into a rhythm that Caleb would not have been able to describe to anyone, but that he felt in the way that days had started to have a texture they'd lacked for 6 years. Morning was no longer just the start of time that needed to be gotten through. It was the sound of the stove being lit before he was up. It was the smell of coffee already made. He didn't say any of this. He wasn't built for saying it. One evening, deep into December, Caleb found Serena sitting outside despite the cold, wrapped in a wool blanket on the front step, looking at the sky. He could have gone back inside. He didn't. He sat down beside her, not close, just present, and looked up at what she was looking at. The Milky Way was out, thick and indifferent, burning away up there like it always had. "My mother used to say the stars were the record of everything that ever happened," Serena said. Not watching, just holding it. He thought about that. What's the difference? Watching means someone's keeping score, she said. Holding means it happened and it mattered, and it doesn't have to be anything else. He looked up at the sky for a long time. He'd looked at this same sky 10,000 times since Ruth died and felt nothing but the size of it, which was not comforting. Tonight, for some reason he couldn't name and didn't try to, it felt different. Less like distance and more like company. "She talked about you," Serena said. "My mother. Not often, but the way she talked about the people she actually respected, which was with specific details instead of general ones. She said you fixed a loose step at the boarding house one winter without being asked and without mentioning it. She said she came down one morning, and it was just fixed. I needed something to do with my hands," he said. "She said you'd say something like that." He almost smiled. He stopped himself, which was habit, not dishonesty. "Where will you go?" he asked. "After the hearing? After the property's settled?" She was quiet for a while. "I don't know," she said. "I thought I knew before my mother got sick. There was a plan. It dissolved." She looked at the sky. "Now, I think I'm trying to figure out what a plan looks like when you're making it for yourself instead of in response to something." He understood that more than she knew. "This place," he said after a while. He wasn't sure where the sentence was going when he started it, which almost made him stop. He kept going. "It's better this winter than the ones before." She turned to look at him. He didn't explain it further because he didn't know how. He went back inside, but he left the front door open a little longer than necessary against the cold, which was the closest thing to an admission he knew how to make. Vane came in January. Not alone. He brought a man Caleb didn't recognize and a county deputy who had the uncomfortable look of someone who'd been told this was a legal visit and was beginning to suspect otherwise. Vane himself was the kind of man who wore his certainty on the outside, heavy-set, deliberate, with a folded document in his hand that he held the way men hold things they want you to be afraid of. Caleb was at the barn. Serena was inside. Vane walked past Caleb toward the house without acknowledging him, which told Caleb everything about the kind of man Vane was. "Mr. Vane," Caleb said. Vane stopped, not because of the tone. Caleb's voice was level, almost quiet, but because of something in the quality of the stillness that surrounded it. The kind of stillness that comes from a man who has made a decision all the way through and has nothing left to negotiate. This is a civil matter, Vane said. I know what kind of matter it is, Caleb said. And I know that the filing you're holding was superseded by the counterfiling we made 6 weeks ago, which the county has already acknowledged in writing. So what you've got there is paper, and what I've got is documentation, and what you're doing right now is trespassing. Vane looked at him. He looked at the deputy, who was now studying the frozen ground with great interest. The hearing hasn't concluded, Vane said. No, Caleb said, but the hearing will. And you've had enough time working in county offices to know how it's going to conclude. He looked at the man beside Vane, the one who'd been watching them in Sheridan. You can send your man to watch us in town all you want. Doesn't change the paperwork. Vane was quiet for a moment. He was measuring, the way men like him measure, looking for the soft place, the uncertainty, the edge he could press on. He didn't find one. I'll be at the hearing, Vane said. I expect you will, Caleb said. Vane left. His man went with him. The deputy looked at Caleb with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite relief and got back on his horse. Caleb stood in the yard until the sound of hooves was gone. When he turned, Serena was at the front door. She'd heard everything. She had an expression he'd seen before, not in her, but in people he'd known who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just felt someone else put a hand under it. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he said, which he did. Why did you? He looked at the empty road for a moment, then back at her. Because the claim is right and legal and your mother spent 4 years defending it, he said. And because some things need someone standing in front of them. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back inside. He stood in the yard a little longer than he needed to. The hearing was in February. The judge was a practical man who read the documentation in front of him without theater and dismissed Vane's counterclaim in language that was short and final. Outside the courthouse, in the gray February light, Serena stood very still for a moment, and Caleb watched something release in her, not dramatically, just the particular ease of a person who has been holding their breath for a long time and has finally stopped. She didn't cry. She wasn't built that way, and he'd have been surprised if she had. She just stood for a moment in the cold air and breathed. He stood beside her, not saying anything, just there. They rode home in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. That evening, for the first time since she'd arrived, they sat by the fire without the pretense of having something else to be doing. No ledgers on the table, no mending, no reason given. Just the fire and the sound of the wind off the mountains and the stove ticking with the cold. After a long while, Caleb said, "Your mother was right." Serena looked at him. "About asking you," he said. "It was the right thing." She was quiet for a moment. She was usually right. It was annoying. He almost laughed. He let himself this time, not much, just enough. It had been a long time since he'd laughed at anything that wasn't bitter. She looked at him when he did. There was something in her expression that he'd been seeing for weeks and hadn't let himself name. He looked away first, which was not something he usually did. "I'm not going back to Natrona County," she said. "It wasn't a question." "The property's yours now," he said carefully. "I know." She looked at the fire. "I'm still not going back." A pause. "I don't want to." The fire moved. A log settled. "I told myself I wasn't going to let this happen," she said. "When my mother told me where she was sending me, I thought he'll be a decent man and I'll be a decent lodger, and in the spring things will sort themselves, and that'll be that." She looked at her hands. "I'm not good at predicting what I'm going to feel." "Neither am I," he said, which was the truest thing he'd said in 6 years. She looked at him. He looked at her. It was not the look of strangers. "I don't know what word to use," she said. "For what this is, I'm not your ward and I don't have a word." "Neither do I," he said. "But I think the word comes after the decision, not before." She was quiet for a long time. "I want to stay," she said. It was simple and plain and the most courageous thing she could have said given everything. He looked at the fire. "Then stay," he said. It was not a dramatic thing. It was not meant to be. They were not dramatic people. But in the quiet of that February night, with the Bighorn Mountains holding the cold and the fire doing what it could about it, something that had been locked for a long time came open. Not by force, not by accident, by the slow accumulation of ordinary days and honest work, and two people who had both decided, without meaning to, that they were not as done as they'd thought. Spring came the way it always does in Wyoming. Reluctantly, then all at once. The grass came back along the river. The calves were born and sorted. The garden Serena planted east of the house came up in careful rows, which Caleb watched from the fence some mornings with a feeling he couldn't name and didn't try to. They were married in Sheridan in April. A small thing. The clerk, a neighbor who'd driven in to witness, and Mrs. Galvin from the county office who'd watched the whole arc of it with quiet satisfaction and produced a jar of preserves afterward without explanation. Small towns remember. Sometimes that works in your favor. The summer was good. Not perfect, good. The kind of good that is real because it's built of daily ordinary things rather than occasions. The fence line got finished right. The supply errors stayed corrected. The north pasture, refiled and properly claimed, got its first full planting in 3 years. And one evening in late summer, Serena found him at the gate the way she always found him when something needed to be said plainly. She waited until she had his full attention. Then she told him. He stood still for a long moment, his hands in the top rail of the fence, the last light coming off the mountains. He looked at the land he'd been standing on for 11 years, the land that had been quiet for 6 of them. And then he looked at her. And he went to her, not with words, because he never had the words first, but with the kind of certainty that comes from a man who knows exactly what he has and is no longer afraid of losing it. He put his arms around her and held on the way that a person holds something they had convinced themselves was gone. The Powder River kept moving, the way it always has. The mountains kept their cold. The stars came out that night the same as any other night, holding everything that had happened the way Adeline Cold said they did. Not watching, not judging, just holding. And somewhere in the long, quiet distance, or perhaps only in the place where a mother's love outlasts her body, Adeline Cold was satisfied. She had known, before anyone else, what was possible. She had trusted an honest man and a stubborn daughter, and the plain arithmetic of two people who needed the same thing at the same time. She had been, as usual, right. I keep thinking about the $2 debt. Not the land claim, not the courthouse, not the February morning when everything finally settled. I keep thinking about the fact that Adeline Cold remembered a $2 debt for 20 years. Not because she needed the money, but because the returning of it told her something true about who Caleb Marsh was. She filed that away. She held it, and when the moment came that she needed to trust someone with the most important thing she had left in the world, she went back to that small, unremarkable act and built her decision on it. That's the thing about character. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in the small moments, the ones nobody's watching, the ones you don't even remember doing. Caleb didn't return that $2 because he was performing decency. He did it because that's who he was when no one was keeping score. And 20 years later, that quiet integrity was the reason a dying woman trusted him with her daughter's life. The cause was small. The effect was everything. That's how it works, whether we're paying attention or not. And then there's Serena. I think about the margin notes in that legal text, the years of careful, methodical thinking she'd done about a problem most people would have walked away from. She could have grieved and let the property go. She had every practical reason to. Instead, she read and thought and built her argument piece by piece because she understood that the world responds to preparation more than to need. Intelligence isn't something you're handed. It's something you exercise in the dark, before anyone's watching, before you know whether it will matter. She exercised it anyway. That's what made her ready when readiness was required. But what I come back to, most often, is the moment Serena said, "I want to stay." Just that. 3 words, plainly spoken, in a room where she could have hidden behind practicality or strategy or the legal settlement or half a dozen other reasons. She didn't. She said the honest thing, the vulnerable thing, the thing that could have been refused. She had been carrying loss her whole life, her father gone early, her mother fading, the plan she'd built dissolving the way plans do. And she had every right to protect herself. She said it anyway. That's not recklessness. That's the specific courage of someone who has decided that staying closed is a cost they're no longer willing to pay. 3 lives turned on those qualities. Adeline's honesty in how she raised her daughter, Serena's discipline in how she prepared herself, and the courage both women had to trust a world that hadn't always been trustworthy. Not because the world promised to reward them. It didn't. It rarely does. But because those qualities, practiced long enough and quietly enough, tend to find each other, tend to build something. Caleb stood in his yard for 6 years being a man who'd stopped wanting things. It took a letter from someone who'd watched him carefully for 4 months, 20 years earlier, to remind him that wanting things is not the same as losing them. Serena Cold knew that. She raised a daughter who knew it too. "I'm still learning it,"